Welcome to the Probability Podcast. Discussions on emerging and converging technologies, problems that are being solved, and the probability of positive and negative outcomes that we might expect. Now, please welcome your hosts, Jason, the generator Spracklin, and Patrick, the discriminator Lozon.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Probability Podcast. This week we're diving into the rise of AI scientist agents and autonomous labs. Across biology, materials, climate, and astronomy, these systems are moving beyond chat assistants to become active research partners. We'll look at how tech giants, biotech startups, and robotics companies are wiring agents into their research stacks, from literature co-pilots and code helpers to lab operating systems that run instruments and data like programmable science factories. We'll also explore how scientists' daily work is changing, the skills that matter in an AI-driven lab, and why debugging your digital lab partner is becoming part of the job. Join us as we unpack how AI is reshaping discovery, what could go wrong at scale, and the guardrails needed to keep science grounded and credible. So Patrick, isn't that what every creator wants, to be surpassed by their creation?
Yeah, for sure. Everybody wants to succeed by having their work stand up for themselves. But this is literally their work overcoming or over leading what they do in the future. So I don't know. When you think about this, though, what is this really? Right? This is the agents. Right? We talked about the agents before. This is evolution of the agents. Of AI agents and how they're going to become multifaceted. And it's not just about, processing gobs of data and coming up with summaries, right? This is about reasoning. So, performing both those primary functions and then from there, being able to act on that to address gaps, right, of knowledge, in order to make a discovery or confirm a hypothesis, and then be able to take that and move that forward to the next level, right? So this is a big step, what they're talking about here, not only with agentic programming, but with the evolution of AI. And all of this is going to be a learning process that's going to be pushed back into robotics eventually.
Well, absolutely. I think if you look at, think about, the idea of agentic AI or autonomous labs or however you want to frame it, right? And if you take it back to what does a scientist do, or even what is science essentially, right? Is that it's coming up with a hypothesis, it's running an experiment to either prove or disprove the hypothesis, and then continuing to iterate on that, right? And iterating until you actually prove or disprove it. Because even there's times when they've disproved something in science and they've gone back to it when they have more knowledge or more tools or more information, and they take another run at it, and then they're actually able to come up with a different kind of result. So if you think about the idea of an AI agent being able to do that over and over again at scale, where a human would eventually hit some limits as far as, we all have to sleep and what have you. But if you have these autonomous systems that are continually rerunning, these tests and figuring out how to prove things or disprove things, then it seems like it's going to be able to arrive at these kind of conclusions at a faster pace. And we've already seen that through some of the breakthroughs. Some of these AI systems have already been able to solve scientific problems that have essentially sort of stumped human scientists for years, if not decades, right?
Yeah, when you start looking at it, part of our issue, right, when we're reasoning, is we got with the scientific method. You think about it, it's they're looking for causation, right, versus correlation, right? We're pattern identifiers, so we can make an assumption. Right, we can correlate things and say, well, that's a cause where it's not a cause, right? We can say that, ice cream sales go up when air conditioning sales go up, and the two are tied together, and that's not a tie, right? That's a correlation. When you're looking at root cause, and it's, making something happen specifically because of that, that's that's a proven case. That's a result case, right? And we often make broad assumptions in decisions that are based on correlation, right, versus actual causation, right? And that's a fundamental. That's like a hallucination,
Yeah.
situation with AI, right? So the idea here is that being able to drill through the data from a point of view of eliminating correlation and identifying causation to get to the root of the answers, right? And move to new solutions, right? That's really important. But the other aspect of this is you think about any particular scientist, right? One that is very successful, a particular scientist in his or her field, has a very broad understanding of many different things within their field, right? However, strangely enough, a lot of great, discoveries are made, and they're because of incidents and information outside of the field of focus,
Or
right?
accidents, right?
Yeah, exactly. Accidents, and that those accidents are serendipitous. They actually make huge leap forward, right? And whether it be material science or physics or chemistry or whatever field it is, right? So the idea of an AI acting, as a co-pilot, so to speak, being able to, not only go through the broad base of, field information specifically tied to that area of understanding, but going outside of that, being capable of going outside of that and look at that tremendously large data set of information, and then look at being able to discover from that data set, right, the patterns, right, the correlations, and then ultimately the causations, right, and the relationships between the data. So ultimately, I think that's where you're going to go above and beyond where we are today with individuals, because a normal person just doesn't have that broad expanse of knowledge that AI can funnel through, right?
No, it's
And
true.
yeah, so I think it's going to the big challenge here, of course, is the reasoning model and the ability for instead of coming up with a specific decision on data, here's a solution, but that solution is kind of a hallucinogenic, right? It is, we need to really focus on the cause and effect model. We really need to prove, right, something, i.e., here's an hypothesis, here's the experiments we can do to test that hypothesis, and then we can arrive at a solution, a conclusion that we can use to derive the next step, right? So it's very iterative, being able to do that, and with that, right, you're able to basically fill in gaps of unknown, of information that you don't know about at the time. And that's what science is all about. It's about discovering. It's about the next, the frontier, the unknown, right? Digging into that and making it known. And so you have a known data set, and then you move forward from there into the unknown, and you do that through the scientific process to understand whatever you're focusing on, and using experiments to discover what really is and what really isn't, and that is ultimately how you move ahead, filling in those gaps, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's also interesting to think about the idea of a co-pilot. Like, I don't think we're saying that these AI scientists are going to replace humans, at least not quite yet. I guess we're all these
No,
companies are working
yeah,
towards like agentic AI, but the co-pilot aspect is interesting because it can, like everything that AI is applied to, it kind of takes a lot of like the grunt work and the time out of it, right? So it's sort of a
it can
productivity
accelerate. Yeah,
tool in a sense, right? That can go and like go through all the data and summarize. And if you look at a lot of these, systems that we interact with today that are sort of like, chatbots plus, context and, tools and different things, like they really give you a set of tools to work with. Whereas the AI, I guess if you call them the co-scientists, are explicitly, trained on how to model the scientific method to generate research goals, propose those testable hypotheses and design experiences. And I guess what I'm saying is that that's really why the next evolution of AI was agents, because now you can train a model to think like a scientist, to behave like a scientist, and to go through all those different permutations of what a scientist goes through when he or she is trying to, like I said, prove or disprove a hypothesis or a theory. And I think it can do that, like I said, like until it reaches a point in which the human can look at it and then make some sort of decision around it, right? That I think you still need that human in the loop, and that's going to be often where you're going to find the breakthrough, that the AI is going to do the heavy lifting part of it and bring all these information points and outputs to the scientist, and then the scientist can look at it and go, oh, that's interesting, maybe I'll go down this rabbit hole and explore this one aspect, and that's maybe where the breakthrough happens. But we've also seen these AI models just come up with breakthroughs on their own, so that's probably the really exciting part about it, right?
Well, think about it, these agents are going to make stupid mistakes, right? I say stupid as a loose term, right? They're going to make mistakes. They're going to do what hallucinate things. They're going to go down, the rabbit hole, so to speak, and come up with some pretty outrageous solutions and basic conclusions, which one would say, whoa, let's roll this back and try this again. There's definitely a refinement right now. We're in the golden age of AI, like I said before, and we're building out now the ability for AI to really refine its reasoning model, right? Really look at not only derive proper decisions from observations, but also to fill in information and pursue information and build new information and new data from gaps, right? We're teaching the AI how to teach, or how to learn, right?
Yeah,
that's what we're doing, and this is in a way can be quite scary too, because if you think about it, these AIs out there will in time outstrip teams of people, right? And its capability to find new information and come up with new conclusions and new discoveries. And I think the tendency will be to allow these agents to run, quite loose and not have a lot of controls on them in order to see what they come up with, right? And to me, I understand that tendency, because we're naturally curious, right? We want to see what they are capable of doing. However, that process could be dangerous in its own right, in ways we can't even fathom right now, right? Especially if they come with the wrong decisions,
Yeah, like where are the checks and balances, right? And that's kind of the imbalance that we're going to start to see in this world of agentic AI, in a sense that you're now going to, have multiple different sort of agents running. You're going to have one person kind of trying to oversee them, for example, right? If we think about the scaling up of teams. But I did think it was interesting when I was, reading through like the scientific kind of aspect of things when it comes to that, and how you would basically have these different agents all kind of designed in a different way. So as opposed to having, we've tended to think about agents as like, oh, we have this single agent that does everything. And I guess theoretically you could have that. But what you're seeing is these more like purpose-built agents, right? So you would have one agent that is the hypothesis generator, right? And then you have another agent that then is going to like design the experiment, another one that's going to write the code, and maybe another that's going to evaluate, and finally one that's going to review, right? So then you have all these different purpose-built agents that are sort of behaving like individual humans, right? So they have some, I guess, like objectivity in the way that they're operating. If you try to combine all of those together, that's why when you have a team of people, you typically is not a team of one. It's very rare to find like one person that can do everything, right? And you can switch from job to job to job, right? But if you look at Henry Ford, he was known for knowing how to pick all the right people to have around him. So he was able to pick all the smartest people to form a team around him, and then together they created Ford Motors, right? As opposed to him doing it all himself. And then you see the same thing here, where you can have sort of like a team of agents that are all performing individual tasks, and then together they kind of produce the output, which is pretty, fantastic when you think about it. I don't know what it means for the future of like scientists and teams of scientists, but I think you're always going to have a need for a human in the loop. I don't think we're going to see who knows? I was going to say, I don't think we're going to see the day where we have all these agents running around and replacing humans, but who knows, right?
Yeah, I agree with you. The idea of having all these agents being able to work together in a very effective and a very efficient manner, purpose-driven, is not a model necessarily that we have outside that, right? With people, right? Everybody has their own specific lean on things and their own conceptualized approach to how problems should be solved. So, the efficiency itself is going to be, quite high with these integrated agents, and we call it a super agent on top, right? That's kind of coordinating all this. If you look at the Google AI co-scientist, that platform is built just like that, and they're going to continue to refine that and or have different agent plugins, and depending on the field of study and also the processes around what they're trying to perform here. So I would think that we're going to continue to see these reasoning platforms, these scientific agents, really evolve in all different areas of study, right? Well, right now it's fairly generic, right? But IBM Watson, it's a generic model, right? And the ultimately, though, I think we're going to see refinements of these agents specifically for physics, for chemistry, and material science, and astronomy, for the study of weather, right? And with that, those models, right? Those are essentially going to then be refined, and I do see them being basically, I'll say, pulled or shrunk down into a very efficient model that then can be implemented in a robotic, being, right? But ultimately, you're making the next step for AI here. Now, this is all going to take time, but at the same time, who's going to benefit in this golden age is us, right? Without the AI overlords taking us over just yet. And we're going to, what's a problem? What's a scientific problem? Well, if you look into the field of medicine, I don't know, the cure for cancer. Why haven't we found the cure for cancer? Some would say we haven't found the cure for cancer is because we don't have the capitalistic, focus to actually cure cancer. Well, whether or not that's the case, right? I think personally, many diseases are we just have not had all the components in place to actually come up with the solution. I think these AI tools are going to cut through all the, the political, the geopolitical, the different layers of we'll call it company politics and different organizations that are going to make a profit. All that's going to be basically thrown out the window, and we're going to point this tool at a problem, and it's going to come up with solutions. And those solutions are going to be effective, and they're going to work, and we're going to say, it's time to move, it's time to roll these solutions out, right? That's the next, I think that's the next challenge, because in the end, when it comes to, basically creating those solutions, right, which is, in the case of medicine, would be, different processes, right? Different medicines, different, even health awareness, is part of it. There's a whole bunch of things around medicine, we'll say, that aren't, it's not all just pills in a bottle, right?
No, fair enough. Yeah. I think what you're going to see is also, like you mentioned, the economic angle of like trying to solve, medical problems and so on. I think this is a way to do it at scale, at a much more cost effective way. And so I think you're going to see a lot of progress there, because it is, you see the millions and millions of dollars that are raised for research into curing cancer or Parkinson's or any of these, maladies that really we pour millions of dollars and we still don't get the results. So like you said, like where's the motivation for even more to be invested, especially like at the government level? But with these systems, if they prove to be effective, then there's a way to do it in a much more cost effective way, I suppose, right?
If you look at medicine today, is medicine about, solving the problem? Is it about finding solutions to the disease? Or is it about treatment, ongoing treatment of the symptoms of the disease, right?
There's some of that for sure. Yeah,
it's more the latter, right? It's more about, if I give you this, medicine that can help lower the symptoms, but it's not going to cure you, but you'll have to take that medicine for the rest of your life, right? And that's the type of medicine I think is, it's unethical, right? It's profit driven, and I think with these types of tools that look at a broader, that step back and they look at a broader collection of information, they can distill down and find relationships and solutions outside of just the focus area. Because if you look at it in a lot of different situations, certain scientists are very focused on what their area is and what, how specific things work within that area, and they're not looking at it in a broader context. And a case in point, especially with medicine, you can find all these specialists, in medicine, right? But the idea that the body is a, single functioning, thing, that everything is related to everything in one way or another, and all those functions, they call it functional medicine. All those particular functions are tied together, and the body itself has, multiple methods to address a problem. Not just one way, but many different ways. A good example, you can spell it if you understand how the immunity system works. It has, a dozen different ways of, basically destroying a pathogen, right? Now, I may be underrating that. There's a lot of ways we don't know how things work. So, that's the big area of discovery, I think, is going outside of this focus area and pull in all this broad knowledge, and then finding, this correlates with this is, these systems are tied together. This happens after this happened. This is a relationship here. Being able to understand the broader context of data and how the body works.
Yeah, and also being
right?
able to dive in to specific areas when you need to be able to.
Yeah,
If you look at, you've used doctors as the analogy, right? So you have your, say, your family doctor who's sort of a generalist, let's say, right? That they have sort of a general knowledge, but when they identify there's, oh, there might be something going on with this person's heart, for example, then you go see a heart doctor or what have you, right? Or if what's interesting is that they'll send you off to that doctor and those results will come back. So it's almost the same idea, except for you could combine all of this into like, one agent or a group of agents that could all like work together. I always, I remember somebody saying once, like, why is it with a human we have like specialists for every different part of the body, but for like dogs we have like one vet. We have one doctor that looks at your entire dog, but with humans we have these individual specialists. Like there's no like vet that specializes in like the heart of an animal, for example. But
yeah,
with humans we've taken, this really specialized practice of really studying the one aspect of the human body, which is a little bit different from the idea of a vet, right? So
yeah. No, I hear you. And integrated medicine to me is the undiscovered country, right? It's the where we got to go from the point of view of health, right? And understanding biology. That's just focused areas is where we're at, but being able to understand all the relationships between all these different systems and how they how they function, not only from the primary responses, but all the secondary and the tertiary and all like I said, the body has many different ways of functioning and solving a problem, and being able to understand that from a multiple level, and that is very complex. You know, Understanding that as a whole is very difficult, and I think that's where we can get to with these models, right? To a point where we can make discoveries of even of the most boring information. There's a new discovery that comes out because it learns about all these relationships, and it comes up with an observation, and it comes up with an hypothesis. Hey, what if we should investigate this, and then it performs those tests, and it comes up with a new conclusion that this system is tied to this system, and so on and so forth. I do believe that we're going to see some major movement in this area. This is ultimately, where we think about AI and intelligence. This is that. When we think about intelligence, this is about the evolution of reasoning to a point where we're going to see artificial uh, you know uh, artificial knowledge being generated, right? New data being generated because it's now able to conduct its own tests,
well, yeah,
right?
a lot of science is like a lot of science is based on logic, right? And this, I
Yeah,
mean, some of it's certainly intuition and experimentation and accidents or what have you, but a lot of it is based on logic and knowledge of science and how things fit together. I think what's interesting is we talked about the idea of AI agents, which I mean that's a pretty common theme throughout the world right now when it comes to how AI is getting integrated into workplaces. But one of our more recent episodes, we talked about the idea of thinking robots, right, and integrating reasoning models and LLMs into robotics that can operate in the real world, and that's really the next evolution of. For a while there, we're kind of have these co-pilots or chat buddies that we can talk to. Now you're branching that out into robotics, which naturally extends into the lab, right? So you can have
yeah,
robotics or robots in the lab that are set up to run experiments that are tied into the AI agents, and now you can, there's this concept of the lab operating system, and so it's a combination of software tied into robotics that can just kind of run these experiments kind of in the real world over and over again. So we're not just talking about looking at a bunch of information and spitting out a report. We're talking about the ability for these agents to run labs and run experiments.
In the physical world.
Yeah, in the physical world, exactly.
Yeah. Not in the virtual world, in the physical world. It's one thing is to build a model in virtually, and then that model can completely collapse because in the physical world, there's raw data, there's information that's not in the virtual, right? There's certain things that were not considered, right? But in the physical world, you run the test and you learn from that, right? Here is the effects of we use a centrifuge and we can't distill those chemicals to that point. Whatever, those are realities. The constraints of reality is what the physical world ties into solutions, right? And with that, you can build out practical solutions, real solutions, not just dream up ideas, but actually create something, right? And I think to myself anyway, I think with this, the idea of building robotic testers and such, and the robotic labs and stuff, that's going to really expedite the process. But I don't think I think that's one course of it. The other course is, for instance, a co-scientist, these agents, it comes up with, well, we're trying to solve a problem, right? And why don't we try bang, 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 right? These 4 different things, because I have, information here that we have to solve, these 4 different hypotheses before we can make, any kind of big step forward. So you're going to have this, very focused recommendation lists, from our little agent, and our little agent is going to be, waiting in the wings for the answers. So, can you run this test, right? And people, not necessarily robots, depending on the scope of the test or the experiment, will be involved with that. But it's all about the focus to get at the solution, right? Where people can lose focus. These agentic scientists are going to be very focused on the solution, where they're going, right? And I think that's going to help drive the focus, right? It's going to actually come back with a solution in the end, right? Now, if you pick the wrong problem to solve, right? The wrong goal to go after, well, that's your fault, right? But
if the lab blows up, you just replace the lab, right? So there's less risk there in some ways, but I think it's interesting because you're starting to see an emergence of a lot of companies get involved in this, right? So we've got companies involved in biomedical and drug discovery, for example, right? We got BenchSci and Atomwise deploying neural networks for large-scale virtual drug screening in pharmaceutical R&D. So it's kind of pushing the idea of research into drugs forward, right? You got companies looking at automation, robotics for biological experiments, a whole bunch of different areas that they're impacting in there. But there's also also specialist startups. So the one startup that I thought was really interesting, only because of the kind of money and power put behind it. You've got periodic labs, for example, right? Really immersive, even Jeff Bezos and other giants in the tech industry are investing in these labs, for example, right? Because they know that ultimately there's money. It's not just for medicine; it's for all these other disciplines. And if they can harness AI for that purpose, then they're sort of off to the races, right? So you're seeing this. I think at the very least, that's kind of a good outcome, in the sense that a lot of these companies are really investing in AI purely for reasons of profit. And while there is profit behind this, it's really going to mean the advancement of these scientific fields with these companies with huge amounts of money being put behind it, right? It's definitely the upside of AI, I suppose, or at least that's my thought.
No, I agree with you. I mean, Elicit is another company where they pull information together of all published information around a particular, you know, subject. The the idea of, you know, a lot of discoveries are made, but they're tied to another discovery, which is tied to another discovery, right? And if those, you know, everything isn't timed right, it can take years, decades before the final discovery comes out that does answers a, you know, particular problem, right? This can really accelerate that, where, you know, information, like I said, the broad range of information can be pulled together, and we can find out that there are relationships, and we can derive, you know, a direction of you know, investigation, and actually come up with a solution faster, right? So, you know, it's really a challenge for any one individual to soak up, you know, every, you know, particular piece of information in their field. It's just incredibly difficult for somebody to know everything in their field. It's just, you know, especially a field that's growing every day. So if you have, you know, this automated, so to speak, with AI, you have potential there of coming up with these, you know, interrelated discoveries, right? And with that, there's a huge amount of potential here, both financially, you know, for the companies that are, you know, performing these functions, and for humankind, right? So whether it's Sakana AI or Licit or Periodic Labs, all those startups have incredible potential, and to help in this area. You know.
Yeah, I mean they're very mission based as well, right? And obviously there's, like I mentioned, there's some big money behind it. But if you look at, there's more than 20 researchers who left their work at Meta, OpenAI, Google, DeepMind, and other, you know, big AI companies or companies involved in AI to join Periodic Labs, and many of them gave up potentially huge paychecks, right? A lot of these big companies are paying like astronomical salaries to these top sort of scientists in the world of AI, and yet they've all chosen to get behind something like Periodic Labs, right? So I think that's, at least there's some thought process there around, oh well, I could go here and make, you know, $20 million more a year, or I could go and actually put my work to some purpose. And it's, I guess it kind of heartens me to see that there are still people in the world that are willing to go and kind of put their knowledge and their experience behind something, behind a sort of a bigger cause, right? That is more than just about money. And, you know, it really speaks to, you know, the dedication people have in these fields of really wanting to push the field forward, and not just caring about money. I mean, that idea that they gave up collectively probably hundreds of millions of dollars in salary to go join more of a mission-based company around science, I think is really great.
I agree with you. I'm there with you. You know, we think about these founders, and some of them are really, you know, taking some risks, right, and move into their next role, move into their next position. Is it going to, you know, from a point of view of their own, how is it going to affect their own situation, right? And ultimately, what are their personal goals here? Is it just to make money, right? Or is it about, you know, leaving the planet as in a better position, leaving humankind in a better position than when they were, right? I think there's, you know, there's lots of people out there that will claim that's their mission, but really their mission is, you know, raising capital and for themselves. And then there's others who are, you know, to kind of walk the walk, right? And they're not bragging about it, and they're putting in the extra time, and they may not personally, you know, get the recognition. They may not personally get the financial gain from it, right?
Yeah, so let's get into some of the other areas. I mean, we talked about sort of, you know, the medical science and whatnot, but, you know, science is a pretty wide swath of different areas like chemistry and physics and the climate and space exploration and what have you, right? So where else can we see some of this, AI driven science kind of percolate, I guess?
Yeah, and astronomy. I mean, the idea of a lot of these, particular labs and such, they're all and telescopes, and they're all automated, right? So, being able to coordinate with the help of AI to do studies and watch specific celestial bodies, and also come up with, um, you know, uh, study plans and research plans, and um, basically being able to break down the data that comes. Everything comes down as just raw data, and the idea is that you take that raw data from these advanced telescopes now, and you come up with observations based on that data. So um, depending on whether you're looking at Hubble or JWST or some other orbital one versus smaller telescope on Earth, that data set can really vary, right? But they can also complement one another, and the idea of amalgamating all that wide amount of data and coming up with new basically hypotheses to test by going out there and doing more research, I think can be very illuminating. And think about CERN. We do all these collision tests with no very very pristine conditions to find out how particles when you ram them together, what happens and how they decompose and what new particles are created. I mean, the idea is this understanding of how everything's put together. We still have holes in understanding what dark matter is and how the energy is distributed across macro areas like galaxies and universes or the universe, and what do you mean by multiple dimensions? I mean, there's so much to understand there, and AI can help build new discovery paths and new areas of research to come up with different hypotheses and ideas that can lead to even further discoveries. So, I mean, those are just two. I'm sure we've already talked about medicine, which is
Yeah,
tremendous.
absolutely.
You know,
Well, if you look at the whole idea of, you know, chemistry and coming up with new things, for
yeah,
example, right? Like new discoveries. You have, back to like periodic labs, right? They're looking at like the autonomous discovery of new materials using what they call closed loop research platforms, right? So they're planning the experiments such as like mixing powders to discover how to make better batteries, um,
yeah.
or
Batteries is a great,
superconductors, or
yeah,
so. I
yeah,
mean, like being able to like continuously do that mixing process and evaluate and over and over again. Like when you get to that automation, that's really where you're able to like scale up these things and come to those conclusions faster.
yeah,
It's I think some of those like repeatable processes is where things really start to shine when you think about the idea of AI agents and robotics and automation and repeatable processes that could just be chugging away at trying to figure out what the right combination is. You can have a scientist that puts an input and says, well, here, we're going to give you all of these different sort of materials or powders or liquids, and you just go ahead and like, mix them and experiment on them and report back. And you could just sort of let that run while the scientist does something else. I do think there's something to be said for like even like I mentioned earlier, the idea that it can run these things at scale, and that really frees up the scientists to spend time to really like sit and look at the outputs and hypothesize as a human and think about their instinct and their gut feel around things, and to really have some breakthroughs that then they're not sort of caught up in the day-to-day activity of running a lab. Well, just let the machines do that, right? Not to say that the machines won't come up with their own sort of conclusions and breakthroughs, but I do think, like everything else, it kind of frees you up to do more kind of thinking work. I mean, even that's the way that oftentimes I use AI in my day to day, especially I find myself gravitating towards it when I have to do something that I know is going to be sort of a time consuming task that I know that, AI can get 80 to 90% there in terms of accuracy, in terms of the output I would have gotten if I had done it manually. And then I kind of use the AI to go, okay, let's get all the grunt work out of the way and give me something that I can sit and kind of work with and mold into something useful. It can be a huge time saver.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I remember working on something, freelance for somebody, in that I had to put together a proposal for something, and I ran it through, I think it was ChatGPT, and gave it the instructions in terms, I gave it the context, I told it what it was I was looking for, as generally speaking, as an output, and what the end goal was. And I mean, what it output in like less than a minute was shocking to me, because it was something that when I looked at it, I'm like, well, this is actually pretty close to what I would have written. But to sit down and like work through it and figure out the structure, like probably would have taken me like half a day. And this thing did it in like a minute. And then granted, I probably spent another half an hour to an hour really going through it and reading it and fine tuning it. But it literally saved me like half a day's worth of work. And the output was pretty similar to what I would have produced to begin with. So that was kind of a little bit of a light bulb moment for me about how I could use this, quote unquote tool to get me from like point A to point B so much faster. I still had to have the knowledge that what I was looking at made sense. So that's where I still think you need the scientist to look at the output and understand the reasoning and how this conclusion, was produced, or at least I know the inputs that were put into it, so that I know that I have the right input, and I look at the output and I look at it through my, lens of, I guess, experience and, expertise, and that I can get there faster. It's the way I kind of look at it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And if you think about the idea of bridging, right? Bridging the physical world with the world of data, right? The virtual world. That's essentially what we do in our minds, right? We take all this data and then we basically, chew it up and come up with our own ideas, and we use with those ideas we attempt to prove them, and that then makes us, that helps us with a decision on what to do next, right? And many discoveries too, if you look at the history of science, many discoveries are very happenstance, very serendipitous, because it's about observations, right? People have made observations, Mike Wave, Percy Spencer, he's working on his radar magnetron, and he notices his candy bar melted in his pocket, right? Things like that, right? So when you do observations, the idea is that on the physical world, the idea is you're going to basically document all information, including outlier information, right? Because a lot of times outlier information drives the future discovery that may be 20 years in the future, but is very important, right? Whether it be something like I found mold in my petri dish and it killed the bacteria, right? And that was penicillin, right? I do think that observation information, the proper logging of that information, the discipline to do that, and in the physical world, it is something that, and then pumping that data in through our AI scientists' processing methodology, I think that's going to come up with some things that are good. It's going to be great, right? But that again is it's an evolving field. We're going to see, some of these platforms won't do well, and other ones would do incredible things. And I do believe that, those individuals who are getting involved with those, right now on the ground floor they're going to benefit, if not just for the fact that they helped with the development of these tools. They might even help. They might benefit financially too.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at even like, the workflow of a scientist now is probably dramatically different, especially if they're using these tools, right? And how the scientist is still operating like a scientist. It's just, like I said, using tools. So like, a scientist might, be embarking on a mission to, get to find progress in a certain area of science, for example, right? Or to make a breakthrough. So a typical day, like a scientist might start by using a tool like Elicit to refine a research question through an AI literature agent, right? That scans through millions of papers and summarizes everything and brings them back a really rich set of data to look at, right? And then the scientist can really inspect that and kind of figure out if it needs to kind of go back and refine it and, kind of use that, like we talked about, that agent to really dig through a ton of information to bring back kind of the basis for the experiment, right? And then they might use like a co-pilot like BenchSci to, kind of go through and, co-design experiments, right? Rather than building them from scratch. Like you can use the agent to figure, okay, well, I have the data and now I want to go through an experiment, and how do I design that experiment? And I can probably go through multiple iterations on that, right? So it's freeing time for deeper reasoning for the scientists about like trade-offs and risks and that type of thing, right? And then from there they can really get into like the AI lab and work through that experiment in really an autonomous fashion, and then look at the results. But I'm assuming it could really help a scientist go, well, I'm gonna spend some time here. I'm gonna work on this problem, but I'm gonna get this AI agent or this tool to go off and do this. So let's just say it was running in an experiment. Well, great, that experiment's running. Now I can go over here. I can start, a new discovery process. And you can have these. That's the beauty of autonomy. You can have these things running and doing that work while you're doing other things. I mean, I keep bringing it back to myself. Not that I'm a scientist by any means, but if I think about how AI works into my workflow, is that if I have two screens set up and I'm working, I can say, okay, well, let me put together this prompt. I really need a deep research paper on this as a basis for something I'm working on. I need to get a baseline of information. So I can give it the prompt. I can look at its research plan. I can click research. I can have that running away in a window over here. While that's running, I'm over here like answering emails, right? Or chat messages, or I'm like working on some other piece, right? I'm sort of like multitasking in a way, right? That I have this, AI agent or a deep research agent or what have you over here, plugging away. And I mean, even if you watch, if you go into like Google Gemini, for example, and you run like a deep research report, it gives you a plan and here's how I'm going to go about it. But if you actually watch it go through it, it's pretty fascinating to see how it's going through all the steps, and it'll show like a swath of like, oh, I just went through these like 50 websites, right? And it did it in like seconds. I mean, I could have sat there and gone through all the same websites. It would have taken me 2 hours. This thing just went through like 50 websites in 15 seconds. And then it just keeps piling through more and more websites and research papers and PDFs and just churn. And then I come back to it and now I have a fully baked report. I mean, it may not be perfect, but it's at least a basis of research fully constructed around all the inputs and the context that I gave it what I wanted. So in essence, I can do more with less time instead of me spending the time as I would have traditionally in my career by like going to Google and doing a search term and going through all these websites and reading it. Now I'm basically giving this sort of agent an instruction and it's running off and doing the work for me in essence.
Yeah, I
right?
mean, that whole deep research thing was, the initial, prodigy for building out the AI scientists, right? It's the idea here is that these tools are evolving, right? And what we're going to see in the future, I think, is these AI scientists agents being able to, basically reason themselves to a point where they actually find a significant discovery, right? And where I'm going with the idea of bridging back to reality versus, the physical world is it doesn't always have to be, automated there either, right? Automation there is great, but, if you think about it, you know, I just went back to that one, the serendipitous discovery point of view. Often those are accidents, right? So it can come back to the imperfect world of reality with humans, and we do something, but when we perform the experiment, we had some weird behaviors, right? Because we had, we didn't do something right, or it had an accident or something, and voila, we have an answer, right?
Yeah.
And that amazing discovery. So I think that it's a mix of both worlds here that I think we're really going to move forward, and it's not going to be just the very concise, precise, automated, accelerated AI engine that's going to be the ultimate solution to this. I think it's still going to be a mix of man or woman, say mankind, and automation, right? AI. I think that's where we're going to have or make the discoveries that are going to be notable in the future.
Well, you're going to need that, right? So until we reach this idea of, I guess, sentience or what have you, or even before that, if you look at as much sort of faith and trust and money we're putting behind the current generation of AI, right? The LLMs and the agents. I mean, they're still based on sort of a fundamentally flawed, system, I guess, in essence, right? If you think about, there's no AI model that's immune to hallucinations, which to me is a big problem. That, I don't know when we're going to solve through that. And maybe when we do, this becomes an easier kind of pill to swallow, that these, we can really fully rely on these agents or on these models. But right now we can't, right? And we've even noticed that when an LLM gets something wrong and you challenge it, sometimes it doubles down on the answer, right? There was somebody asked ChatGPT, like, how many R's are in the word strawberry? And I think it said there was like 2, and the person kept going, well, no, there's 3 words or 3 R's in the word strawberry. And the LLM, I think it was, like I said, ChatGPT, just kept doubling down and saying, no, you're wrong. And it's like, anybody can look at the word strawberry. I mean, just Google the whole thing about ChatGPT and the word strawberry. It's quite fascinating how it just doubled down on the wrong answer. And you really can't have that if you're running this in a scientific manner. But again, that's where the human in the loop comes in, right? To look at something and go like, does this actually make sense? And I think that's ultimately where we're going to land with these things, is that until we can actually fully trust it, which who knows if we're ever going to get there, we're going to need that human in the loop, or hopefully the scientist in the loop, especially when we're looking at, drug discoveries and other, scientific angles that are going to impact our lives. There needs to be some checks and balances in it, and some semblance of like, we're going to have some, safety constructs in here, and that we're not just going to take the outputs at face value, but we're going to use it as a tool, right? But maybe we should talk a little bit about kind of risks and concerns, which is kind of where I'm going with that, right? Around this all sounds really great in theory. I think, where was I going with that? So, it sounds really great in theory that we have these really powerful language models and agents and what have you, and we're going to have scientific breakthroughs, and it's going to be incredible. But as we've talked about many times in this podcast, Patrick, when there's always a great upside, there always seems to be a caveat or a concern or a risk we got to think about. So, in terms of this particular area, what do you think? What's our downside? I know you're always the doomsayer, but
Yeah.
where things are going to go wrong. I'm sure you have some opinions on this.
Well, I did allude to one where the AI tool will come up with solutions and those solutions would be an answer to a problem like a cure, but the company that performs that function doesn't have to argue with an AI agent. It can just flip it off. Whereas if a specific scientist was involved, there's a moral dilemma there for that scientist. In other words, if let's say they discovered a cure for a specific type of cancer, and that scientist would have a moral obligation to say, look, this goes beyond profit. Sure, I understand where you make your money is in, addressing pain or whatever have you have for a symptom, and this will actually stop the problem completely, and it'll financially devastate your company because your medicine will no longer be relevant. But however, this is the cure, right? And we have to move forward with it. That's a moral obligation. AI scientists won't be able to argue that, right? Again, when you're looking at it as a tool, but tools aren't perfect. They can come up with wrong answers, wrong solutions. They can lead you down that that path that may not be the right one, right? You can spend a lot of money chasing that specific solution and never find it. Is that more? Yeah. Is that because the tool isn't capable? I think it's because the tool's still evolving, and those research tools and those reasoning tools just aren't that well developed yet. So there's going to be some costs there. There's going to be some imperfections. And again, I think, let's go back to regulation, right? I would like to think that there's, transparency in these tools built in, so people can understand how it got to what it got to.
Well, you would think so, right? Because oftentimes, if you think about hallucinations, right, that how do you know it's a hallucination to begin with? For example, right? How do you know that this output is actually not correct when oftentimes the output, it looks very plausible. It looks like it's sort of based in some sort of reality, or, oftentimes I'll read an output of something and something will kind of jump out at me and I'll go, okay, this is a hallucination. This doesn't bear any resemblance to the reality I know, like around the subject matter, right? But that's for the human to figure out, because again, you have to have that scientist and look at something and go like, does this make sense? But even then you can have an entire output, a report or a hypothesis that's been proven, and it all looks very structurally sound, like it looks very plausible, but it's really not. And that goes back to what you were talking about how did it get to this output? So that's that transparent piece, right?
Yeah.
Because otherwise what you're going to have, unfortunately, is what we're seeing everywhere in the world, is you're going to have the entire scientific community, if you will, or however you want to put that, is going to be overrun with AI slop. It'll just be a different type of slop, right? It'll be like a scientific slop, because it'll be all this stuff that looks authentic, but really was, the results of, hallucinations or imperfections in models or lack of human oversight or whatever it is. And there has to be some gatekeeper on that as well, or else we're just it's going to end up the same as everything else, right? You won't know what's real or not at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So we can get noise. It's slop.
A little bit of noise in the system, but I think as well, then you get into, if we think about the other side of it is sort of intellectual property, especially when we're, if we get outside of sort of, medicine, even around materials generation and who owns what, patent on what. I mean, we already see a huge problem with intellectual property in AI and how it's, pilfering off creative works, and people are creating things that are maybe not their own, right? That has been, the model has sort of scraped and now they're passing off something. So I think it's the same thing here as well, right? Who's getting the credit for these things? And that's a big thing in the scientific community, right? Is around when there's a discovery and breakthrough, who gets the credit for that breakthrough, who gets the notoriety, and as well, like I said, who owns the patent on that, and when it comes out, and who's validating that when these models have already been trained on terabytes of medical information, which is what I mean, it's basically the output of all the scientists that came before. And now you have an AI model that's using, whether it's, IP or published studies or what have you, to create this new discovery. Is that really owned by the person that deployed the AI model, or is that co-credited to all the people who create the research that enabled this, breakthrough to begin with? I mean, now we're getting into the real slippery slope, but I mean, that's like every other industry. That's where we're going with this, right?
Yeah, that's right. So we'll see what happens. I mean, bottom line is, I think this is going to take a few years. It's not going to be immediate. However, I really am hopeful that we're going to see some positive out of this. So I'm positive versus negative.
Mr. Hopeful today. Oh, I like to hear that. I like hearing that. But I mean, there's certainly a lot more upside, but then there's all those, potential for misuse or for, problems to run rampant, as they sometimes do, right? I mean, we've discovered this with AI, that is a bit of a double-edged sword, right? In that it's there's so much positive upside and there's so much concern with how it's managed. I think that's ultimately the real challenge here, right? But I think it still comes down to a human kind of moral decision, or oversight, and it all comes back to Jurassic Park, Patrick. It's we spent so much time figuring out if we could do something, we didn't stop to think about whether we should.
Thank you for listening to the Probability Podcast. Please join us next time for more musings from the generator and the discriminator.